suppose you were going to write a story, and you decided to write a romance, okay? And you wanted to write a story that was going to have elements of attraction and courtship and love and marriage. And so to write this story, you create a lot of characters for your story. And you decide to create two main characters, and you could name them, say, Benjamin Castle and Marguerite Pelletier. Okay? And your intention for this story, your intention for these characters, is through a lot of events and circumstances, they're going to come to love each other and to fall in love and to marry. However, soon after you creating these characters and beginning to write this story, you find that these characters have a mind of their own. And that even though it was your intention as the author of this story for these two to love one another, the exact opposite is happening. That these characters indeed do not love one another, and in fact can't stand each other, and they hate one another. And Marguerite Pelletier goes after some jerk that she doesn't really need, and she marries him for some reason, and the guy is a rake, he's terrible. And and so if you were the author of that story, and your intention was to have those two fall in love and get married, what would you do with that story? If it was your story, and these were your characters, and this was your intention, well, I suppose you'd have a few options for your story. One thing you could do is abandon the story altogether and collect all the pages that you'd written and authored and throw them into the fire and destroy it. That'd be one thing you could do. Other thing you could do is try to erase it all and rewrite it. Maybe perhaps come up with a different environment and scenario for these characters, maybe rewrite the characters a little bit that your will might have accomplished in the lives of these two. Or maybe a third option would be for you to not stop writing, but to just keep writing, and to hold on to the hope that you can still, through different methods as an author, bring these two that you intended to marry one another and fall in love, to come and bring about that final will that you have. God, being jealous, he chooses the last option. Certainly, God, in creating us, had an idea in mind for you and for me and for mankind and for his creation. He had an idea for what it was going to do and be, and he had an idea for the story. But of course, we had a mind of our own, and that for which we were created, we rejected and went after something else. And of course, God had the option, I believe, to abandon the story and to collect everything and everyone and to burn it and destroy it. He also had the option of starting over, which he nearly did in the flood. Or the last option that he had was to continue to write and to continue to author, to bring about his initial stated will that he had for us, that he had for the world. And as you see in the story that we have in the Bible, and the story that we're still living out today as characters in this play, that he employs a lot of different things to bring about this original will that he had for mankind and for the world that he created. He employs reason. We know in the first chapter of Isaiah, God came to his people and said, "Come, let us reason together." He also employs circumstance. He creates and orders circumstances that cause people to come to his way of thinking. He also uses discipline in that same way. He'll hurt us. He'll give us the rod in an attempt to correct us in our way in life. He uses warfare with the rival elements that are competing for our affections. He has done that effectively. He goes to war against Satan himself. He has sent his Spirit, certainly, and of course he sent his Son. He sent his very Son. He sent representatives as prophets and priests, but he also sent his very Son to come down and to do that one work, that great work, which could bring about the completion of his will, that could that chapter in his story that can bring about the end that he originally wanted. Now, to me, this methodology, when you're talking about using reason and you're talking about using circumstance and you're talking about a dialogue between God and man, this to me is evidence of two elephantine realities, or two realities that are as large as elephants to me when you read a passage like this, which is that, and they seem to be almost in competition with one another. The big first reality that you see in that methodology of trying to regain and to complete the story as he first intended it is that God is sovereign. That God is the author. He has the power to create and the power to author things. Okay, so he is sovereign. But the other elephant in the room, the other big reality that's evidenced by this methodology, is that you and I are responsible. That there is such a thing as God's sovereignty and human responsibility working together. That He has endowed us with free will, the will to choose. And so this is the big problem, if you want to think of it that way, that you and I are faced with, that the whole story of redemption is faced with, which is this whole idea that God is sovereign, that He is the author, that He has a stated will, and that we also have responsibility for choosing whether or not to agree with His will or to seek our own. And so, with that in mind, there's no perfect solution for that, but there is a lot in that debate that causes us to come to a decision and to application of this truth. And I think with that in mind, I want to examine a particular portion of this passage, and I want to focus on Christ's work in coming to free us from that which binds us. Okay. And the first point I want you to see in this passage, or the first reality in this ongoing situation of applying God's sovereignty and our human responsibility, is that Satan has power sufficient to imprison you. That Satan has power sufficient to imprison me. Look down with me, if you would, at verse 21. Now, what preceded this conversation, or this little soliloquy that Jesus gives, was the exorcising a demon out of this man who was mute. But look down at verse 21. This is something Jesus asserts here. He says, when a strong man, fully armed, guards his own homestead, his possessions are undisturbed. Now, in this passage, you need to read the strong man as Satan. His armament being lies and deception, which is what Satan is armed with. Those are his weapons. His homestead is this earth, this realm, this place that we live in today. And his possessions are you and me. Okay? I used to spend summers in college working for ServiceMaster, which was it's a company that does a lot of different things, fire and water damage. It also does a lot of carpet cleaning. And I used to spend summers doing that, and up in Vermont. And I was part of a 3-man crew. The other 2 guys on my crew were Dave and Stu. And Dave and Stu hated working Saturdays. I did too. But the boss, if we were really busy, he'd make us work Saturdays. And the way that Dave and Stu would get back at the boss is by smoking marijuana all day, on our day. And I remember it made me very uncomfortable. Because I remember we'd go to the place, we'd pick up our work orders, and it usually meant driving up to the ski resorts where we'd clean carpets all day. And I remember we got up there, and they'd park the truck, and they'd start to smoke. And they'd always offer me a smoke, right? They'd hand it back to me and say, take a drag, Tate. And I was always sitting on a plastic bucket in the back of his van. It was miserable. They'd always hand it back to me, and I would say, no, I don't want to smoke anything. And I'd say, and they'd always say, are you gonna make trouble for us, Tate? And I'd say, no, but this is stupid. You know, we're gonna get caught, we're gonna get in trouble, and it's dangerous, and you guys are silly. These were grown men, by the way, you know, with families and everything. And I'll never forget, though, I mean, they keep handing it back to him. And I remember one time Stu looked back and he said, you know, Tate, we'd all feel a lot better about you not telling the boss if you just take a hit. And the point that he was making was that, and it's a true one, that their control over me was dependent upon my compromise. If I were to compromise and smoke along with them, they had control because they knew that I could never incriminate them without also incriminating myself. But as long as I stayed free of it and didn't smoke it, they didn't have any control over me. I was free to do that.